Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute, letting some other people come into the room. And thank you for being here. If you're looking for the joys and challenges of leadership in higher education, you are in the right place. And we'll get started in just about 20 seconds. All right, why don't we get started? So welcome to the joys and challenges of leadership in higher education. My name is Sean Devendorf. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement and Annual Giving here at Tufts. And I am delighted to be joining you for the fourth installment in this series of virtual conversations centered around leadership in higher ed. But we are navigating a time of significant global and national change, and these shifts are being felt on campus and across our communities. And this series was designed to connect you, our alumni, parents, and campus community with the inspiring ways our academic and faculty leaders are collaborating, innovating, and guiding us through these transformative times. And I'd like to thank the Dean of the Graduate Education for the School of Engineering, Dr. Karen Panetta, for being our featured guest, and Vice Provost Monroe France for hosting this series. So today's event will be a conversation between Karen and Monroe that will include many of your pre-submitted questions. And now I'd like to give a brief intro of Monroe before turning it over to him, and he will provide a short intro for Dr. Panetta. So Monroe France is the inaugural Vice Provost for Institutional Inclusive Excellence at Tufts and a professor of the practice at the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. Monroe serves as a member of the President's Cabinet and is charged with guiding Tufts' strategy for advancing institutional inclusive excellence. Previously, Monroe served as Senior Associate Vice President for Global Engagement and Inclusive Leadership at New York University. Monroe has a track record of providing strategic consultation and coaching on change management, inclusive and innovative leadership, as well as organizational assessment and transformation to senior leaders and executives across the globe. Monroe is often invited to present on the future of work and talent, leadership during times of crises, and approaches to fostering effective global partnerships. Monroe is also a visiting thought leader for Woxin University in India. Please join me in a virtual welcome for Monroe France. Monroe, thank you. Great to have you continuing this incredible series.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate your partnership in this journey as we go forward. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate you being a part of this conversation. It is my wonderful pleasure to introduce Dr. Karen Panetta, who received her BS degree in computer engineering from Boston University, her MS and PhD degrees in electrical engineering from Northeastern University, right in Boston. Dr. Panetta is currently the Dean of Graduate Engineering Education and a professor with the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Tufts University. She holds the secondary appointments in computer science and mechanical engineering as well. Dean Panetta is the director of the Panetta Vision and Sensing Systems Laboratory. Her research and interest includes developing efficient algorithms for artificial intelligence, stimulation, modeling, signaling, and image processing for biomedical security and conservation applications. In 2011, our very own Dr. Dean Karen Panetta was awarded the Presidential Award for Engineering and Science Education and Mentoring by President Obama for her Nerd Girls program to empower young women in STEM. So that's all I'll share now about her bio, but we have a lot more to discuss because we have a very accomplished person with us here today. How are you doing today, Karen? How are you?
I'm doing great now. You've made me sound fabulous.
Because you are. Because you are. So I want to start the question first, like hearing a little bit about your journey to where you are now. So, what inspired you into becoming an engineering in a field that has been, really underrepresented? Women are really underrepresented in like over its journey. And was there a specific moment in your life growing up as that young Karen where you had that aha moment of this is what I want to do in the world and this is how I want to impact change? So tell us more about your journey.
Sure. So it really wasn't an aha moment versus you will do this. So,
Okay.
I didn't even know what an engineer was. And it
Mm.
was actually my father who wanted me in the worst way to be an engineer, but he really didn't consider that until he saw that I had the aptitude for math and science. So he said, you're going to be an engineer. And you need to do that because it will give you financial stability and independence, and you need a job that can support your bad shopping habits. On anybody else, and I especially don't want you dependent on my credit cards for the rest of your life. So, he sent me, I got into good schools, but I had to stay in Massachusetts. Girls don't go off to school, and I had to commute. So I always tell folks that I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift under the Citgo sign in Kenmore Square making sandwiches. And
Wow.
at 8 a.m. I was in an electronics lab and doing my schoolwork.
Mm.
And that's how I fell in love with computers. That's really what I fell in love with, was computers and everything that they could do. And that was my entrance, and I became a computer engineer because I was like, I'm designing computers. That's what I did. And I think that was the scope of what I saw engineers doing, was you build what the title says. You
Mm.
build electronics, right? And that's when I didn't have that broad awareness of what I could do with that degree until I came to Tufts.
Wow. So I'm curious, like, did you have role models that, I know it was like, I had this experience directly transferable, this is an unprepared question. Did you have any role models that you looked at and you said, okay, this might be my possibility into the future? Yeah.
That is like the whole impetus of why I started Nerd Girls, because all my role models were already long gone and dead.
Mm.
So,
Wow.
Marie Curie, right? I mean, that was it. She's long gone. It's like, how do I help other young people find role models when they're somebody from 50 years ago? How do you connect with
Mhm.
that? So that was
Mhm.
my whole concept of Nerd Girls, is like, let's show them role models now of people doing great things. And a
Yeah.
lot of the role models I saw mostly were men, that were just fostering and nurturing women.
Mm.
There were no women that I saw. So I think that that's why I wanted to create an environment to show and dispel some of the stereotypes that I was, that I was up against many times. So,
Mm.
even in college, it was like, what are you doing here? Go home and have babies. I mean, it
Mm.
was really that time. So, I'm glad that I could laugh it off and
Uh,
have the stamina to withstand it. But yeah, it was not it was not an easy path.
And that's interesting. I want to get to that a little bit later more in terms of navigating some challenges in your career. But before we get to that, I want to also hear a bit more about, like, sort of, you moved from industry, right? And then you moved into the academy. And we talked a little bit about this as we were preparing for the webinar. So tell us a little, I want to hear a little bit about that transition and the why maybe for you of making that transition into the academy. But also, I'm always interested in what leaders learn from their experiences. And so I would love to also hear from you. It's like, what did you learn? And how has that informed your practice and your research now? Yeah.
Well, first of all, the transition was a punch in the face.
Okay. Okay. Tell
And
me more.
I took a pay
Yep.
cut in half from
Mm.
industry, but what motivated me to come was I was already, one of the things that industry paid for my master's and PhD degree. I did both of those degrees part-time while I worked full-time, which, that's why I started a lot of part-time PhD programs now and trying to get more part-time people in from industry, because I appreciated that, I couldn't afford to do that. But if my company, and my father was the one who said, what, free education? They'll pay for it, you go. And so
Right.
I did the master's degree, and then I enrolled part-time in a PhD program, and I was doing that and doing research at the same time. And then finally it came to a point where I was like, well, where do I want to do with this? This is where I realized, I was like, I don't want to build computers for the rest of my life. I want to do something that impacts humanity. I want to,
Mm.
I have so many diverse interests and passions. I love animation. I love, visualization. I love all this different science. I love, conservation, animals. How do I, put
Yeah.
that all together and make a career out of it? So I also had, as an undergraduate, really, really, I would say, I don't want to say aggressive, I would say cold professors.
Okay.
It was, that looking to your left, look to your right, that person will be
Mhm.
gone.
That
That
kind
was
of
the
stuff. Yeah, I
culture.
see. Yep.
That was the culture. So I, swore to myself that if I could pass the PhD qualifier and get that PhD degree, I would become the type of professor I wished I had had to
Mm.
help more students get through the process and become engineers. And that's what I did. And the only thing I never realized, the lesson learned, was I had never taught before. Nobody ever gave me anything in lecture. So when I got hired by Tufts, it was like, here's your textbooks, go teach 110 kids in a lab,
Yeah.
and students. So it was like, they lucked out. But there was also a misconception. She's a woman, all women are nurturing, all women are good teachers, and it's like, and somehow I was going to have this innate ability to be a fabulous teacher. I mean, I did.
Yeah, yeah. But it's about the assumptions,
It was
right?
about the assumptions, yes. But they also assumed that I couldn't write a proposal or ever get funded. So that was the other one was, well, and then I came up on my very first day of class, no women in my class. I came dressed in all pink before the Legally Blonde movie came out, with pink high heels, pink suit. My hair was done up back then with the big blow dryer and the hair, big hair. And I walked in and immediately I was like, she is not a serious engineer. And that was like, that's when I realized, I was like, wow, the way you present,
Right.
people equivocate to your intelligence. Wow, that's crazy.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's so many questions, right? And I think there are so many ways in which that we think about how we occupy space or parallel, right? And we were just talking about this, but I want to go a little bit more to your research, right? And why has it been important for you? Like, I mean, you started to talk about some of this, right? Role models and helping to disrupt an industry that has assumptions about certain people. But if you want to build on that more in any way, has it been important for you to focus on women and gender in your work? And, I love how you talk about Nerd Girls, as you were just saying before. If you want to tell us a little bit more about sort of how you built that program and the impact it has had in terms of your field and the work that you do. And because I know your work is much more expansive than that, but it's also been such a cornerstone for the impact you've been able to make in your field. And so I want to hear about that. Yeah. Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to do something with, animation. I knew I wanted to do something that was impactful. And I also was under immense stress because of the tenure process. I was the first woman in the department.
Wow.
I came in as a visiting professor. I'm the first one to ever move from the bottom all the way up inside the institution to in engineering to do that. And the challenges were, you don't do all this extracurricular, nerd girl stuff. Don't do all this other stuff. Stay focused on the research, the publications, the getting the money. And I was like, all right, I can do that, but I can do this too. And I think that's where the push came, was, no, you can't. Nobody does that. And just because they said you can't, that made me want to do it more. So I think that I decided that I would have, yes, I'd get my research, I'd get my money, but I also wanted to do something that I felt was fulfilling. So that was the next thing. So I looked at it as like, here's my short-term goal. I got to get this tenure thing out of the way. But then, here's where I want to be. And where I wanted to be was doing, things that made impact. So I got the opportunity to travel quite a bit by working with outside professional organizations. And I got to go to India, and I saw, firsthand, working with autistic children and the lack of nutrition that these rural populations had. So I was like, well, if I said, what can we do to fix this? And somebody said, well, if you could just help us collect data and present it, and we could actually use it to motivate people to support these programs. And that's what we did. We tracked over 1 million cases of young girls under the age of 4 with autism. And we showed that the doctors and the input from the doctors with all the data analysis, we showed that there was a link to their condition to poor nutrition. And so a lot of them ended up being mainstream. So that to me was like, wow, I did that with my students. That's amazing. And then, his Excellency Abdul Kalam, who was the leader of India, came to thank me and my students, which blew my students away. It was like, she's got, this famous guy from India coming to thank us for the work that we did, just using our skills, our engineering skills, to help them do an analysis. And that's really when it clicked that, hey, I can do so much more for people. And some of the projects I did, like I have a patent on an artificial electrolarynx. Young girls are afflicted with thyroid cancer and have that horrible, electrolarynx. And I was like, why hasn't anybody developed something to bring back a natural speaking voice? And when I looked into it, it's because there was no money to be made. There wasn't a big enough population. And to me, those were the problems I was really interested in, is like, well, just because there's no money in it, does that mean I shouldn't do it? So I always have a saying now, it's like, let's do the right thing. And that's
Yeah.
what.
Let's do the right thing. And I love too, because you're asking the questions and you're trying to seek answers to the questions too, right? And not letting, no one's ever done that before, like hold you back, right? And so in a really way, again, I continue to say, I see you as a disruptor in really powerful and meaningful ways in your career. And, and as we were talking about this conversation, you've talked about impact a lot today already. But let's talk about innovation, right? Because you've also named, like, as we were preparing, the importance for you to feel like you're innovating, and also that you're able to think about, like, these interdisciplinary cross-sector ways in which that we impact, and how that impacts people coming in, emerging scholars in the field. So how has it informed your choices as a leader, right? This importance of innovation, impact, and how you mentor your students and emerging scholars. You were just talking about your 16 PhDs, right? And so whatever the number was, I may have gotten it off a little bit, but the number of PhDs you put out into like the world as well. And so the leadership, your mentorship, innovation. Tell me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I look at my students as my teammates. I don't look at them. I think that's something that I've always, that's kept me at Tufts, is that if that relationship with my PhD students, they stay in my life forever. And it's not something transactional. And I think that you're building this rapport, this trust with them, and you're helping them to develop themselves, but they're also helping me realize the dream. I don't do it by myself. And I think that they've been instrumental, and I tell them this all the time. They're my team, and I wouldn't be where I was without them. And some of the problems, I will present the general problem and and I'll do the backbone of the architecture, but they're the ones who will challenge me and say, yeah, but will this be, this or that? And I love that back and forth. And I think that that's really, it's easy to just say, here, do this, do this, do this. That doesn't give me anything back, and it doesn't really solve the problem all the time, because you have to understand who you're designing for. And I think that's one of the downsides of most, I'll say new engineers, is that they think they have a solution to a problem, and they think they understand what you are experiencing, but they never ask you. And I think, and so that's one of the things I think that I wanted people to understand, is like, before we design anything, let's get into their environment. Let's ask them, let's see how they live. Let's see what's going on, because what we think is their solution, or what we think is their biggest problem, I'm almost like customer discovery. What's your biggest problem? And I think that has helped a lot of the innovations that we've worked on. And that's why, we got patents, we've got products, we've, got into these spaces. And one of the big ones that I looked at has been motivated by social, actual current events. So I'll give you an example. Right now, if you go through an airport, you're most likely being screened by one of my algorithms that's looking for your water bottles, or, knives and metal, or other types of things that you're not supposed to have. And all of that came about after 9/11. And, I remember I was working on a project. I was on my first sabbatic leave, and I was working on a project for a company that does communications. And when that happened, I remember what happened was they said, that communications device you're working on, we need you to implement it. We're going to fabricate it right now, because we need to bring communications back to New York City. And I was like, and I had students working with me, and I thought, but we haven't fully tested it. And they're like, no, we need this. They did. And within 24 hours, we had New York City first responders had communications again. And that was a totally non-planned act, right? I mean, we helped bring order and bring these vital communications back during this horrible disaster. But I remember when I resumed teaching the day after, I had a student say, how dare you hold classes, after this tragedy, I refuse to listen or be involved in this class right now. And I had to look at it, and I said, if I don't lecture to you and teach you and impart the knowledge that I have on you, and let you go off and just to look the other way, I won't help you prevent this from happening again. I won't be doing everything I can to make sure that we provide the best safety and security and health for everyone. And I was committed to do that. So I got beat up over it, but it was like, no, I'm not going to let them win. I'm not going to let them win. And the way I'm going to win is I'm going to help you become a better person to take on these challenges yourself and change the world. And I still feel that way.
Wow. I mean, and that is, I think, in the spirit of like, what has been known as Tufts, right? In terms of this civic impact and like, how we're producing leaders to go into the world to imbue change, right? And I love this piece around how are you co-learning and co-creating with your very students, right? And I, like you, cannot stand the top-down approach to how sometimes we think about the power dynamic and relations in terms of the learning experience, right? Because we all are co-learners, hopefully, together. And so
yeah, but you see, so this is where you come in, is
yeah.
I have, from my students' perspective, but then you have the landscape knowledge of having to frame the conversations, because sometimes we hear things and we immediately want to jump like, oh, that's wrong, and how dare they even think like that? And you bring it back. I want to, and that's a skill, like, we need that. So talk about how you frame these horrible things so that we can respect each other. That's, I think I got out of that experience with the 9/11 was, I don't share your vision, and this is my point of view, but does that make me wrong and you right? How do you deal with that?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's, to me, it's about like, staying open to possibility, right? Like you said, like if I'm out in the field and I may already have this idea and I think I know everything because, I've been trained to know everything. But if I just stay open to the possibility that I can learn something from someone whose voice has maybe never been heard, or who may just, even if I think that, this person, maybe most of the stuff I don't agree with, but is there a little something in what they say, a little something that may open up another possibility? Now, it should not like disrespect me, right? But at the same time, but if we're willing to come together and hear each other out, there might be a possibility where we can find something connected to help us solve for the future. And so I love, and I think we're saying the same thing, right? And we may come about it in a different way, but I think we're saying the same thing, right? And it's not always easy though. And this is where I'm going to get to the next question. What has it been like for you and your journey? Because I can't imagine, I mean, you have done such, again, and powerful and important work. And with that, someone who is not traditionally considered like what a standard, if there is one, engineer would look like and be, I would assume that there have been probably times in your journey that it hasn't always been perfectly easy. So can you tell me about can you tell me about a time where you've had a challenge?
I think, people always say, oh, she's a pioneer, you're a pioneer. And I'm like, no, I'm more of a warrior. Because, when you're the first one, you're paving the pathway for everybody else. And so, I was in some event with something and the young ladies, and they were saying, I haven't experienced any of this. And the rest of us that were older in there said, you're welcome.
Right.
Because the rest of us have, gone through it so that we can make it easier for others. But I think I had expectations that when you come to academic thinking and innovation, and professors are people too. And just because you have a PhD and you're an expert in one thing, that doesn't mean you know everything about everything and you're never wrong. So, I joke with people to say, as long as you can, understand that they're experts in everything, know everything, and they're never wrong, you'll get along just fine.
Right.
And I think that's part of the problem is, I had expectations that people would be more open. And, some of the things that I saw, like I didn't come from a brand name designer institution. I didn't think that mattered. It was like, I got a PhD. I worked my butt off getting that PhD. I was proud of myself for getting it part-time. Who does that? But that was all looked upon as, not the best institution. Part-time PhD, who does that? So I think that oddity, that not fitting in that rubric is something that, even the traditional paths, oh, you must be a department chair before you can be a dean and before you can be a provost. It's like, these are the rigid paths that everybody must follow. And to have excuses made that, well, you haven't done this. And that's something I heard along the way. It's like, you can't be promoted unless you are IEEE fellow. And it was like, but the people saying that to me didn't have IEEE fellow. So like, all right, I'll get our triple E fellow. And I got it. And then they were like, how'd she do that? You know, I remember the department chair at the time, I didn't know how to write a grant. I mean,
Okay.
I never wrote a grant. And I
Yeah.
remember the department chair saying, go off to NSF, I'll buy you a plane ticket to DC, go off to National Science Foundation and come back with a grant.
Hmm.
And I took him literally, Monroe. I got on a plane. I
I'm gonna
went down
get
and I
one.
knocked on
Right.
doors at the National Science Foundation saying, hi, I'm Karen. I'm a new professor at Tufts. I come from industry. And I think they felt sorry for me, but I came back with a grant. And people, it was insane. I look back on it and it was like insane. And when I went back, I said, okay, I came back with a grant. He looked at me like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I wasn't telling you literally to go knock on doors. I said, what did you mean? I, I was used to that binary. You tell me one thing, not that, hey, go make these connections. And then I got the NSF Career Award, which was like, the epitome of the first milestone for most faculty. Well, now in like my department, almost everybody has got that. And I feel bad for new faculty coming in because if you don't,
Right.
I-
How do you
but,
hold up?
but
Yeah.
yeah, how do you hold up? But getting that grant, I remember I got it and I walked into the chair's office and I said, I got the NSF Career Grant. And he was like, yeah, but do you have any publications? So there was always yes, you have this, but you don't have that. And
Right.
that's been the repeating story. And it's like, at what point and then I wasn't celebrated. I think that was
Mm.
the other thing. As I made milestones, it was like, yeah, that's nice, but you don't have this. And then there was silence. Even the
Mm.
presidential award, there was nothing. It was silence. It was like, yeah, that's nice. You're going to the White House, you're going to the Oval Office to meet Obama. It wasn't
Right.
celebrated. I got accolades. It wasn't celebrated. And I think that was something that hurt because it was like, why am I not being, celebrated for making these milestones that everybody's telling me that I need and that are so impressive. So I
Mm.
think now that's why it's a very different because now I make sure as a dean that I celebrate everything that my faculty or my students get and I get them pressed even inside or outside of Tufts. And even if it's me sending a handwritten note that, I'm
Mhm.
proud of you. I send them t-shirts, I send, whatever it is, just to let them know that we are proud of you. As a community, we should celebrate our accomplishments.
Yes. No, I think about the words that Maya Angelou said, everyone wants to be seen, heard, and know that they matter.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's across the lifespan, And I'm often curious about leadership recovery, right? And how leaders recover. And so when you weren't being acknowledged, you weren't getting like the accolades that you rightfully deserve, right? And people didn't see you fully. How do you recover from that? Because you've still been able to go on, do all of these really like incredible things in your career. And so in the midst of these things, right? This is really a lot for like, young scholars as they're going to enter in this
Painful.
journey
It's
and navigate
painful.
this. How do you
Yeah.
recover? How did you do that?
So,
Yeah.
so there's a book I think that somebody said women don't ask, and it's like this woman asked and heard no all the time. So it was like, well, wait a minute, what am I doing wrong? And finally, I realized it's like I have so much talent and energy, and I want to do these great things. And people were, essentially saying, no, you can't do that here. I know you want, we're not supporting you that here. And finally, even leadership roles, I wanted to try different roles. I wanted to, have trust with different types of things. And, so I couldn't get those.
Yep.
And, even being a department chair, you essentially had to wait for, your department chair to die before you were even eligible, right? There was no upward mobility, and there's only two rungs on the ladder. It's tenure, non-tenure, right? That's it. So I decided that if Tufts did not want my energy,
Mm.
that I would do things outside. And I think
Mm.
that was the best decision I ever made, is because I got involved with my professional organizations. I got involved with other nonprofits. I got to work with the Clinton Global Initiative and work with past presidents. I got to travel around the world and meeting, leaders and other schools and getting to understand other curriculum programs. And that gave me a whole new vision of what
Mm.
new strategies I could bring back to the institution, what new curriculum I could develop for my students. And I think that infusion, and it wasn't just the brand name schools I visited, they were rural schools. They were all over the world. And I think that that perspective really, and, you know, helped me understand how to be a better instructor, how to really gear projects that serve the communities, the environment, and enriched students. And that outside pressure is
Mhm.
what I think made the inside say, oh, wait a minute, look at, I can't go somewhere without them knowing who she is. Oh, I can't, she got another award? Damn, you know?
She's gonna keep doing that? She's gonna
You know,
keep doing
what she
that,
got
right?
going on? Well, she just wrote a book? What, when did she have time to write a book? You
Yeah.
know, and it was with a former student. So I have a book called Count Girls In that I wrote
Mhm.
with one of my former nerd girls, you know,
Wow,
and then
that
I
is
went on the Today Show. That was the other killer. I went on the Today Show with my nerd girls, and the feedback was you cast these girls, and it was like they were all Tufts engineers. And I was like, yeah, this is because they looked so nice.
that's great. We can, well, you can clean up well. So I love this. One of the things I like to think about is being an entrepreneur in your own career, right? And I will say that you certainly have done that because you're like, okay, roadblock here, find a turn there. Like a hurdle there, I'll jump over it in this way, right? I'm not letting anyone tell me what my career must look like. And I think that's really, really beautiful. I mean, I think that we can assume many things about your leadership style, but I want to hear it from your own voice. Like, how would you describe your leadership style? What is important to you as you lead in your field more broadly? And what does inclusive leadership look like to you? So let's take up this leadership question.
Sure. So I think, you know, I always get this, you know, what do people say about you behind your back? And
Hmm.
and what do they say negative about you behind your back? And I'll say that I tell them like it is. And they'll say, what are the good things they say about behind your back? I said that I tell it like it is. So,
Yeah.
you know, I don't, if I have an opinion and you ask me for my input, or I will give you my opinion. You know,
Uh,
I won't, you know, dance around it. I'm not big on hyperbole. I don't have time for that. I really don't have time
oh,
for that. But I have time to listen and I am open. So if I, you know, I say, this is what I think, they'd be like, oh, no. And I love, you know, technical, I loved, you know, going back and forth. But if there's something I missed, I'm open to hear it. Like, here's what I heard. This is what I know. This is the data I have. And I always try to go to the source.
yeah.
I don't like it, you know, like somebody says, well, this is what I heard. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, then I'm going to go to the source because I always find that, you know, you play the game telephone and you know that you can go three people and the message changes. I try to go to the source to make sure that, you know, before I make any actionable decision, that I have
Yeah.
all the data, you know. So I think that was really important that I do that. So I'm always trying to make sure that I hear, you know, all the get real data.
Yeah.
And even with students, you know, I will tell them like it is, you know, if things are going, and I think that's one of the things that has been hard is students are here for a little bit, but when you're building a career as a faculty member, you're with these people for a long time. So to have to tell one of your colleagues, you know,
Mhm.
that I disapprove of something they've done, or that, you know, that I don't agree with them, it could have long standing implications. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a courage that I do have and I'm proud of, is that I am not gonna hide because I'm afraid that tomorrow you're not gonna like me. And, you know,
Mm.
I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to do a job to make it better for everyone. And that requires ethics, honesty, and transparency.
Yes. I mean, transparency is the best friend of leadership, right? Because if you are not transparent, and I love this piece about, how you have consistently shown up, right? And with students, with faculty, because sometimes people will act one way, this group another way, at another group, right? And then people then start to question your authenticity. And what I also appreciate about you, Karen, the time I've known you since I've been at Tufts, is that you're authentic, right? And your authentic leadership like shines and shows up. And so I love that piece too. And your accomplishments, right? And so in 2001, you received the President Obama award for the Presidential Award for Science and Engineering and Education and Mentoring. And then recently, very important, in 2023, you were inducted into as the member of the National Academy of Engineering, right? And we at Tufts all heard this because, again, I think this was the shining light, right, in terms of achieving this very prestigious award. And you've had many other honors, right? And it's so too many to list for today. How does it feel to be accomplished.
You mentioned the National Academy of Engineering.
Yeah.
I was actually on a Zoom call with, our tech transfer, our Department of Innovation at Tufts working on patents, but I also had my students on the call. And, and the National Academy of Engineering, you don't know who nominated you. So it's not like you put in an application.
Right.
And that is like the platinum standard of academia is to be inducted into one of these things. There's only one other person, David Kaplan at Tufts that has this unbelievable recognition. So I happened to be on a Zoom call and the little, up on my screen, a little thing popped up, said, congratulations on your induction, National Academy of Engineering. And I just looked at it and I was like, I just see that. And of course, I'm trying to pay attention to my meeting, but then I had to open the email and I had to share screen because I said, did I just read this right? So I shared screen. I said, I'm sorry to interrupt the meeting, but I have to share screen to make sure that I'm not dreaming. And they were like, oh my God, congratulations. And I think that was it. I needed other people to see it because it was like, no, this really didn't happen to me because you don't expect it. And you find out when everybody else finds out. That's the thing. I think the announcement goes out. And the first one who came in to congratulate me was Dean Lee, my boss.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
was,
It's amazing. Yeah.
which was a 180 from all the other awards. Everything else was met with silence. So it was like, it was so nice to have your boss come in and, like interrupt his busy schedule and come in and recognize me immediately on the spot. So that recognition was tremendous. I think that was amazing to have that happen. And it's interesting now, people say no to me a lot. I just play with a lot more now. And I'm like, wow, they used to say no to me all the time. Why are they saying yes? And then I think that was the other one because Caroline named me distinguished professor. So I guess it doesn't just mean you're old. I guess it means that you have some other things going on. But those two accolades now, I was like, wow, if people who know that, they're little, they also have expectations that I'm going to be a total stiff when I get in the room. And I think that that's the other thing. Again, you don't get to this level without having some sort of, air about you. And it's like, yeah, I'm not that. So I think people are always shocked that, yeah. And people were shocked that I even got it because they were like, she has research. I thought you were nerd girls, right?
Right. And that's sometimes just do what you need to do. Show up in the way that right to show up. And it will all come together. Right? It will all come together by shining and living in your light. How do you? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you got to make mistakes. And if you think you're not going to make mistakes, that's the number one rule we want to tell people. People make mistakes, but how you recover from them and how you take accountability.
Yeah.
That's really key. That shows you how I think one of the questions was like building character. That's how you build character, because if you think you're flawless, you're in for a miserable life.
Miserable, right? And there are people who still believe that they walk on water, and we have all kinds of thoughts about that, right? How do you replenish as a leader? What do you do? What brings you joy in life and work? Like, how do you replenish? Yes.
Yeah.
Bring it in. Who are you showing us?
Oh, a little closer.
Come closer. Come closer. Hi there. Hi.
This is how I replenish. This is my son Benjamin,
Hi, Benjamin.
and we always say that everything that we do, you have to put in perspective. No matter what goes on at work, whatever goes on in your life, it's not a life, and you have to really keep focused on what really matters, and that's what really matters. So everything else. Oh, look at that! All right.
Oh, I love it.
You're recording this, right? Because I want to keep that moment.
So you're recording. So you have to show him that when he's 16, he's gonna give you a hard time.
There you go.
Right?
But that's important, and that's one of the things, Monroe, I've learned a lot from my students. I see some of them on this call. They come here from, far away from home with no family, no friends, and they don't have that core support here. And I think that that's one of the things that, I really admire that what you do and your team does is I can only help students academically and, give them advice. But when somebody comes here and they leave everything behind to start a fresh life, I had my family here. I always had that infrastructure. I feel for our students who pick up and risk everything.
Everything.
Here.
Everything.
Everything.
People and also families who sacrifice everything to send their children, right? Whether it's abroad or to college in the US context, right? And that is powerful. And I just think, yeah, there's so much more I could say about that. So much more. That was, yeah. And I know your family, we've talked about this, how important your family is to you. I know that very much so. So let's get to a couple of the pre-submitted questions, right? I think this is a perfect time. And one of the questions we got was, as a former graduate of the CEE department of Tufts, I really benefited from the experimental college experience to broaden my horizons. What programs are you advocating for current engineer students to broaden their horizons? And then we also received a question about the importance of, and you start to talk about this, how is character formation important, like in terms of your career development? Yeah.
So hold on one second, because I gotta shut the door, but
No problem. Take your moment.
so that's another one of my therapy pets. But one of the things that we do for, I'm glad that they brought up the X College, because I actually, one of my first, non-engineering things that I did was join the X College board and became the chair. And bringing in diverse courses that we weren't offering our curriculum was one way. And I said, wow, these are great courses. And so when I became dean, that's exactly what I've done. I brought in salary negotiation. I think that that's like one of my most popular courses. But the other one that I love is I brought in the George Lucas and Skywalker films, Hollywood's biggest storyteller, to come in and teach engineers and teach us how to tell our own personal stories and incorporate our life into why we're doing the research we do, and tell that story. And it's the first course like that in the nation. And to get someone that high profile to come in and do that for our students, that was all inspired by the X College, because it was like, these aren't traditional, courses that we would find in any engineering school. And so now what I'm doing is I'm trying to provide more of these experiences. I have a whole series called Role Models in STEM. I bring in speakers from everywhere. One year, students said, we want to do stuff on science, on space. I brought in 3 female astronauts. One of them was the shuttle commander. One of them, had been on different shuttle missions. And I brought them all in at different times, and some of them were, underrepresented, diverse populations, and they would come in and talk to students during lunches. They would then do a talk, that type of opportunity. And then they follow up with the students. Is like, I have this connection. I have this connection with these people. One of my, good colleagues is actually the Wozniaks, like and sometimes, she'll text me and things like that, but I can bring these people in and make them, I would say, realize it's not just a role model that's somewhere out there that's untouchable. I can actually talk to them. I can actually interact with them. And I get them involved in other things outside of Tufts that brings them together with bigger communities other than just Tufts. And I hosted a student leadership conference here in 2019, which brought students all across, the world together at Tufts, so that we can share these stories and get these experiences and bring in these leaders, so that you can get different perspectives. So that's how, so I love the X College.
No, a couple of thoughts you brought to mind for me, like, this is a part of why we started the series, is how do we humanize our leaders, right? How do we share stories and create a space for storytelling in the spirit of joy and possibility? And you make me think about, I worked with Disney Imagineering for a while, and I was doing some partnership work with the Imagineers. And that was a big part of what we used as a strategy to recruit students to get into internships, is that I had Imagineers come, this was when I was at NYU, from Disney, to share their stories, to tell their stories, not only about their careers, but their projects and how they'd done their work. And then I got the opportunity to go to Disney and do all this work with them. It was a lot of fun with the Imagineers, but that storytelling piece and how we get the stories right.
And I have a Nerd Girl Nation episode where I interview Disney Imagineers. So yeah, there's a whole web series called Nerd Girl Nation, and there's episodes interviewing all different, 5 types of things. People aren't aware of that, but yes, I'm also out there on the movie sets too, doing some fun stuff.
I don't know where you find the time. I don't know, but but we do when we things that matter and are important to us. I think we all figure out how to fit it into life and it's part of your joy. So someone asked, I am curious to know how I can and how Tufts is supporting my journey, my daughter's journey of studying human factors engineering. And so, how can a parent be supportive? I would broaden this conversation to support their young people and their dreams. And then how are we doing that at Tufts, right? From your perspective as well.
And that, I love this question because it brings in so many different facets. The first thing is most young people don't know what engineering is, never mind, what is human factors engineering? I had to have somebody explain to me when I first came to Tufts, what does the human factors engineer do? And I realized, wow, it's a blend of psychology and, art and as well as, mechanical engineering and robotics. I mean, you can really put anything to help make something more usable for someone or make it more conducive and functional. So that to me was like the first interdisciplinary major that I really understood at Tufts. And I think that we work across, so right now when the School of Museum of Fine Arts was coming to Tufts and all I heard was, the artists are coming, the artists are coming. And I was like, yes, I need that. They're going to help us design better. And people they didn't get it. They didn't understand that you need that perspective. So I think for parents, understanding one of the biggest questions I get from a parent that wants their daughter or to study science, technology, or engineering is like, well, I say, what is your daughter like? And they'll say, well, she likes math and science. I'm like, no. When she's not doing math and science, what does she like?
Right.
Well, she likes, making clothes. She likes doing, cooking. She likes things. Those interests are, she likes art. She likes sculpting. Then I can say, okay, well, you know what? We do a lot of scene and set design and robotics and understanding human movement for artificial limbs. I can then direct and help connect the science and technology. So I always have this recipe. I say, don't stuff the science and technology down their throats.
Yes.
Start from their interests. And our job at Tufts is if they don't even know when they show up at the door and say, well, I think I have an interest, our job is to give them a variety and give them exposure and integrate them into these experiences so that they can further refine it and do that through internships, courses, and role models.
That's powerful. I was talking with someone recently, and they're an engineer, but they do diversity, intersections of diversity, and also helping students see themselves. And he was talking about working with students around sneakers and how sneakers are made, like people who call themselves sneakerheads and all of that, and how he took that interest and that passion to help them to understand how sneakers are made and the engineering behind them and also how they solve for different problems, right? And so anyway, I love that piece about starting where students' passions are, right? And so that's a very, very powerful piece. Yeah. I also see the beautiful, beautiful animal in your arm. I love it.
Another therapy pet, yes.
Yes. So we need them, especially now. Especially now, right? So I have this last question for today. I actually have this last plan for question from our audience, and then I have a question I want to ask you in closing, which is my question for you. So I think this is a perfect way as we wind up the conversation. What is the best piece of advice you could give to an aspiring or new educational administrator from your years of background to help them successfully manage the challenges of the 21st century?
Be proactive and don't react. I think that, we look every day at what's going on in the news and I see people, running around like with their heads cut off and panic ensuing and anger and all those things. I always say that, negativity and negative energy doesn't help you be productive. But being more, looking at strategy and long-term and learning from experience, or not from your own experience, but actually knowing and understanding all the facets. I see a lot of people today react to headlines. And sometimes when we dig down, like you said at Monroe, right? There might be a small piece that, you read this horrible headline, but then you dig down and you're like, well, maybe that headline really isn't representative of what's, all the components are going on. And I think that reaction is really, you need to go to the source. You need to really do a little more. We pride ourselves on doing our background literature search,
Mhm.
And just being able to not react in a negative way when something, and we all have our triggers. I think that
Yes,
knowing your triggers is
yes.
important.
Oh,
You know?
yes. As a leader, that's one of the first things.
Yeah, knowing
Yeah.
your triggers is important, and I always say that, it's important that when at the end of the day, sometimes I'll make decisions that I know people disagree with,
Mhm.
and even, my superiors will, say, don't do it, and I'll do it anyway, because at the end of the day, I need to live with me. I
Yes.
need to know in my heart that I did the right thing. And that's really is stay true to, if everything in your being says this, that I can't do this, and I'm just going along with it because it's the voice or the, it's not for the better good. It's just really because, it's an order. I don't follow orders very well.
Okay. I like structure because like it actually creates more equity and balance, but I don't want structures on top of me.
That's right. That's a perfect way to say it. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And be
Yes,
true to
yes.
yourself. Just, you have to be true to yourself, just one last piece of advice.
Yeah, sure.
I was told, when I first came to Tufts, when I went to a faculty gathering, they told me I have to get rid of my awful accent, my Boston accent, or I would never, be taken seriously. And I know a lot of people would do that because they want to be accepted. I This is me, and that's too much work for me to
Right.
have you accept.
That. Being fake is a lot of work.
Being fake is a lot of work. It is. And I think that that's it. Is this is what you get, and if you don't like it, tough.
I am. This is how I'm showing up. I actually have a question about showing up. This is my last question. What is something that people may not know about Dr. Karen Panetta that you would like them to know?
I think that they see me as very black and white, like, it's very, very action oriented and driven. But there's I at the core of everything is always do the right thing.
Mm,
And doing the right thing is very difficult. It's
mhm,
much easier to go along with the crowd. It's much easier to just do as you're told. And
mhm,
people get promoted very much. You do as you're told, you will be promoted. And it's much harder to resist that and sacrifice promotion, career, or
mhm,
opportunities because it's like, no, I can't do that. I'm sorry, and I think that that's something that it's a personal choice. And so when
mhm.
somebody asks for advice from a young leader, when you decide to choose a battle,
Yeah.
I used to find that I would stand up for people, but then those people wouldn't stand up for me. So it's like, in the end, and I stand up for students all the time and they don't even know it half the time.
Yeah, yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's like, make sure when you choose your battles that there really is going to be an impact
Mm.
of your, rather than just the impact negatively on you. I think that
Right.
if you can make an effect a change, and voice your opinion, that's one thing. But if it's not going to make a change, you have to consider your career might be jeopardized because of it.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's and it's like knowing your values. What are your values? What is your like, who do you want, like you said earlier, who do you want to be in the end of the day?
Mhm.
And and that's going to look very different in different,
Everybody, for everybody.
everyone. And I am like you as well. I am in it because I care, right? And and I want to do good work and impact like people positively in meaningful ways. And so Karen, I got to say that I am so thankful that you said yes to this conversation. And I'm very appreciative in terms of what we've been able to discuss and and connect around today, right? I needed it, to say the least. And so thank you. Thank you for showing up and thank you for the work that you do with our students. And thank you for being a part of this Joys of Leadership conversation.
Thank you.
Well, Everyone, thank you for joining us today, for coming back for our fourth installment in the series. If you can take a moment to fill out our short survey to give us feedback as we plan for our upcoming series on March 12th with Eileen Babbitt, who's professor of practice in international conflict and management, and as well the former director of the Henry J. Lear Institute at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And for now, I want to thank you. Take care of community, and take care of yourselves. Be well. Hope to see you at the next webinar. Take good care. Please don't forget to do that survey. Thank you very much. Ciao.